20 feet underground, in a hole cut into a rock ridge off US Highway 93, a propane burner clicks to life under a battered coffee pot. Richard Roman is 68 years old, and he has just made his morning coffee in a home with no address, no landlord, and no purchase price, because 7 years earlier, he found this old mine shaft choked with trash and rotting timber, and simply started digging it out with his hands. He is the smallest example of something much bigger. Across the country, people who have run out of conventional options are not just surviving. They are building entire, functioning lives inside spaces no one ever designed to hold one. Some of what they have built defies belief, and understanding why takes more than one story to answer. Officially, more than 770,000 people were counted as homeless in the United States. In a single night in January of 2024, an 18% jump from the year before, the largest one-year increase on record. By January 2025, that count had eased slightly to roughly 746,000, with an estimated 266,000 of them unsheltered entirely, meaning no shelter bed, no motel voucher, no roof provided by anyone but themselves. That count is taken by volunteers walking streets and checking known encampments on one cold night a year. It relies on people being visible, but that number, as large as it is, only counts what outreach workers and census takers can actually find. It does not count the man living inside a hillside that nobody had reason to inspect. It does not count the woman whose front door was 30 feet in the air, disguised as retail signage. It does not count the people living inside a drainage system so extensive that the agency that built it has spent more than $2 billion on it over 3 decades and still cannot map where everyone inside has gone. The official number is a floor, not a ceiling. What's underneath it is a much stranger story, and it starts with the smallest of the 3. Roman had cycled through the kind of hard years that don't make headlines by themselves: work that dried up, housing that got too expensive to hold on to, the slow slide that ends with a person outside the system rather than in it. What made him different is what he did next. He found the mine shaft on the edge of Boulder City, already gutted by decades of neglect, full of loose rock, old boards, and garbage left behind by whoever had passed through before him. Instead of walking away, he spent weeks hauling debris out by hand, bucket by bucket, until the shaft was down to clean rock, cool and stable, descending about 20 feet into the ridge. Then, he solved it the way an engineer would, one problem at a time. Power came from solar panels rigged outside the entrance, running down into batteries, and an inverter that turned stored current into ordinary household electricity, enough to run a light and charge a phone, which was more reliable infrastructure than some studio apartments managed during a storm. Heat and cold were solved by the mountain itself. 20 feet of rock holds a near constant temperature no matter what the desert is doing outside, so Roman never needed a furnace or an air conditioner, just a propane tank for cooking and coffee. He shored up the loosest sections overhead with timber salvaged from the very junk he'd cleared out, so the ceiling that once threatened to bury the space instead became what held it up. He carried water in by hand, the one convenience the mountain couldn't provide on its own, and over time, the shaft stopped looking like an abandoned hole and started looking like what people who saw photos of it later called it a personal Shangri-La, carved rather than built. None of it happened overnight. Clearing that much loose rock and rotted timber by hand, without machinery, without help, took the better part of a season before the space was even safe to sleep in. Every bucket out was a bucket he didn't have to be paid to move, and nobody was checking on his progress but him. People who heard about it reacted the way people usually do. "You're living in a hole in a hill" wasn't posed to Roman as a question so much as a verdict, proof to a lot of neighbors that whatever he was doing out there couldn't last past the first hard freeze or the first structural creak. He kept living there anyway, brewing coffee on a propane burner every morning like clockwork. Neighbors who caught wind of a man living in a hole in the hillside assumed it wouldn't last a season. It lasted 7 years. Eventually, it wasn't the desert or the isolation that ended it. It was paperwork. Boulder City officials determined Roman's shaft violated 4 separate city codes and 2 state laws, and in December of 2019, police delivered him a 30-day notice to vacate. Roman didn't fight it. By mid-January of 2020, he had packed out everything he owned, stayed with a friend, and by that spring had moved into an ordinary rental unit in Las Vegas. 7 years underground ended not with a collapse or a flood, but with a code inspector's clipboard and a signature. If a man can spend 7 years living inside a hillside that nobody thought to check, isolation clearly isn't even a requirement for staying hidden. The next home hid in plain sight, on the roof of a business that opened its doors to the public every single day. In Midland, Michigan, a 34-year-old woman spent nearly a year living inside the rooftop sign of a family fare grocery store. The actual internally lit signage bolted above the parking lot, roughly 5 feet wide and 8 feet tall, just large enough to stand inside, with a door built into its own structure. She was employed at the time, holding down a regular job while commuting, in effect, from a home that officially did not exist on any lease, any deed, or any utility bill. She did not just camp there. She furnished it like she intended to stay. She laid down flooring over the metal frame, set up a small desk, stocked a working pantry, and kept a houseplant alive on a shelf inside a sign that thousands of shoppers walked beneath without ever looking up. She had a computer and a printer running off borrowed power. This is not a typo. A Keurig, brewing coffee 30 feet above the produce aisle every morning. All of it ran off a single extension cord she had routed from inside the sign down to a rooftop outlet meant for maintenance equipment, not for a full apartment's worth of appliances. That cord is what gave her away. In April of 2024, contractors doing roof work noticed it running somewhere it shouldn't have gone, followed it along the roofline, and found a door built into the base of the sign that had no business being there. "There's no way anyone's actually living up here," was more or less the reaction on the roof that day, right up until someone knocked, and she answered. Store employees and police were stunned that a person could live there for the better part of a year without a single customer or employee noticing, restocking a pantry, and keeping a houseplant watered in a space most of them had walked beneath 1,000 times without a second glance. When she was found on April 23rd, she wasn't defensive about it. She told authorities it was an old safe spot her family had known about for years, treating it less like a desperate hideout and more like a place quietly passed down, the way a family might pass down a cabin key. She was told she couldn't stay, though no criminal charges were filed. Authorities offered to connect her with housing assistance. She said no. That detail is the one that tends to stop people short. Not that she lived inside a sign, but that when a real door out was offered to her, she chose to keep managing things her own way instead. It's a reminder that the assumptions people make about what homelessness looks like and what help is supposed to fix don't always match the person actually standing in front of the offer. One man dug a home out of raw rock for free. One woman built an apartment inside a sign for the cost of an extension cord. If those numbers sound small and solitary, the next place housed more people than most small towns, and it cost the county that built it $15 million just to try to clear them out. Beneath the Las Vegas Strip, underneath the same few miles of pavement where tourists drop hundreds of dollars a night on hotel rooms, runs one of the largest flood control systems in the American Southwest, somewhere in the range of 450 to 600 miles of channels and drains, roughly 300 miles of it fully underground, built over 3 decades at a cost exceeding $2 billion. It was engineered for one purpose: moving flash flood water out of a city built in a desert basin before it drowns the streets above. Instead, for decades, it has also functioned as a hidden city of its own. At its peak, outreach workers and county officials have estimated as many as 1,500 people living inside those drains at once. A population larger than some incorporated towns, existing directly beneath a metro area of over 2 million people, most of whom have no idea it's there. Journalist Matthew O'Brien first mapped this world for his 2007 book, Beneath the Neon, when he estimated roughly 200 people were living in the tunnels, a number outreach groups now say has grown many times over since. He found people sleeping in beds elevated on cinder blocks, specifically to survive flash floods that can turn a bone-dry channel into a wall of water in a matter of minutes. No warning beyond a distant rumble. He found plywood huts wired with borrowed power, informal codes of conduct between residents, entire stretches of tunnel that functioned like separate neighborhoods with their own reputations, their own regulars, their own unwritten rules about who belonged where. Tell most people there's a 1,500-person community living under the Strip, and the first reaction is disbelief, that it has to be exaggerated, that a city that visible couldn't have something that size hiding directly beneath it. It is not exaggerated. Flash floods have killed people living in these drains, more than once, and everyone down there knows it. That is not a typo, and it is not folklore. It is a documented, mapped, decades-old hidden city, sitting a matter of feet below streets where a single hotel buffet costs more than some of its residents will see in a week, and Paul Vautrinot knows it better than almost anyone, because he lived it. A former theater student at the Las Vegas Academy, Vautrinot developed a heroin addiction not long after high school and spent 3 years surviving inside the storm drains, battling the same addiction that had put him there in the first place. Down there, skepticism wasn't an abstract question. It was the daily argument other tunnel residents made to him and to each other, that nobody climbs out of this, that the drains take more people than they release. He was eventually arrested and routed into drug court rather than prison, the kind of second chance that depends entirely on which officer finds you and what the system decides to do with you that day. He got clean. Then, instead of simply leaving the tunnels behind and never looking back, he went back down into them. In 2015, Vautrinot co-founded the Shine a Light Foundation alongside Jeff Iverson, building directly on the outreach work O'Brien had started years earlier with nothing but a notebook, a flashlight, and a willingness to go where reporters usually don't. Shine a Light doesn't hand people a pamphlet and call it done. It runs a 2-year continuity case management program, paying for sober living placements, connecting people with primary care physicians, walking alongside them for 18 months to 2 years, as they move from a drainage tunnel to an actual apartment with their own name on the lease. The foundation reports a 70% retention rate for people who complete the full program, a figure that would be remarkable for any addiction or housing intervention anywhere in the country, let alone one built and run by a man who was sleeping on a cinderblock bed himself a few years earlier. Skeptics inside city government have raised the same objection for years, that you cannot casework your way out of a 500-mile drainage system. That the tunnels will simply refill as fast as anyone is pulled out of them. Vautrinot's answer isn't an argument, it's a caseload. The same few dozen names, tracked for 2 years at a time, moved one at a time into apartments with locks on doors that are actually theirs. The warmth in this story isn't the tunnels. It's that Vautrinot still climbs back down into them, not to lecture anyone from above, but to sit with people who remember him from before and tell them, from first-hand experience, rather than a script, that there is a door out and that he will walk through it beside them if they're ready. Some take him up on it that same day. Some need to see him come back 3 or 4 more times before they trust it. He keeps going back anyway, because he was them. When the county spent $15 million upgrading those flood channels a few years back, the project displaced up to 1,500 people who had been calling that system home. $15 million in concrete and engineering spent to modify a space that its residents had furnished, subdivided, and survived flash floods inside for free. That is the gap this entire pattern keeps circling back to. The almost unbelievable amount people will build with nothing, set directly against the almost unbelievable amount institutions will spend just to remove it. If stories like these are worth more of your time than the version of homelessness you usually see scrolled past in 10 seconds, this channel keeps finding the ones nobody else bothers to dig up, and that's worth sticking around for. A man dug a home out of solid rock with his bare hands, and it held for 7 years. A woman built a working apartment inside a grocery store sign, and it went undetected for nearly 1. 1,500 people built an entire underground city beneath the most photographed street in America, and some of them are still down there tonight. None of them waited for permission. None of them waited to be rescued before they started building. None of them fit the picture most people have in their heads when they hear the word homeless. A picture built entirely around what a person is missing, rather than what they're capable of building without it. 20 feet of rock, 5 feet of sign, 300 miles of tunnel. Different scales, the same instinct running underneath all 3. When the world stops making room for you, you make your own room, wherever you can find the space to dig. If you want to see what that same instinct looks like pushed even further, into the cold, onto the water, into places engineers swore nobody could actually live, the next video is exactly where that story picks up.